afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Faerie, Fable, Librarians. I'm Simona.
And I'm Katie.
And in honor of Banned Books Week, which is from September 18th to 24th, Katie and I will be discussing Sarah J. Maas's popular fantasy series, A Court of Thorns and Roses. And the reason why we will be discussing this series in particular, her series did make ALA's Banned and Challenged book list back in 2019. But recently, the second novel in her series, which is A Court of Mist and Fury, was removed from some Virginia Beach public school libraries. And I'm just going to quickly, this is from the Daily Press. So it's an article that I found. It's called, "Are Books Previously Found in Virginia Beach School Libraries Obscene? A Decision Could Come as Soon as Tuesday." So what happened is that former congressional candidate Tommy Altman and his lawyer, Tim Anderson, outlined specific passages within the two books that are being brought to court are Genderqueer, a memoir, and this has been in the news quite a bit, and A Court of Mist and Fury. Both books we own, so you're welcome to check them out. And
Please come and check them out.
so the lawyer outlined specific passages within both titles that show or describe sexually explicit content. The schools have since removed both titles from library shelves. However, the petition, which has been brought to the Virginia Beach Circuit Court, also looks to restrict children's access to the books in bookstores like Barnes and Noble. So Barnes and Noble has opposed the move in a brief filed with the court, stating that Altman and Anderson are asking the court to impose an obscenity standard set in an 1860s case in England. And Barnes & Noble representative stated, while most of these controversies have focused on the availability of books in public schools, here the petitioner seeks to move beyond the schools and deploy an antiquated statute to limit access to books generally in bookstores and elsewhere, Barnes & Noble stated in the brief. Later Supreme Court decisions in the current Virginia law say a book or other item is considered obscene when sex is the dominant theme and, quote, taken as a whole, does not have serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. So this is also what is being challenged. And the two authors in question, Maya Kobabe, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and Sarah J. Maas, have not commented so far on what has been going on regarding this suit that's been brought to the Virginia Circuit Court. But book challenges are nothing new. They've been happening for as long as books have been around.
Actually, you can go back as far as like back to BC. I mean, even further than that, when scrolls existed, and anyone that would consider certain scroll writings to be considered heresy or anything like that was banned.
And as Katie said, so this goes back centuries. It's nothing new. There have always been those, whether on a local or political level, that have sought to restrict access to materials for a variety of reasons. And the banning and challenging of books in this country has been going on now for several years.
Yes.
What sort of is concerning is that in addition to school libraries, public libraries are also being targeted.
Mm-hmm.
And as librarians, it is our job to ensure equitable access to all materials, regardless of whether or not we agree with the content. The issue is not whether I agree with something. The issue is that a person has a right to make this decision for themselves, whether or not they want to read any book. And I would just like to read ALA's Freedom to Read statement. It's just going to be a brief excerpt of it. "The freedom to read is essential to our democracy. It is continuously under attack. Private groups and public authorities in various parts of the country are working to remove or limit access to reading materials, to censor content in schools, to label, quote, controversial views, to distribute lists of, quote, objectionable books or authors, and to purge libraries. These actions apparently arise from a view that our national tradition of free expression is no longer valid, that censorship and suppression are needed to counter threats to safety or national security, as well as to avoid the subversion of politics and the corruption of morals. We, as individuals devoted to reading and as librarians and publishers responsible for disseminating ideas, wish to assert the public interest in the preservation of the freedom to read. And this states it perfectly.
Yeah.
Libraries are truly one of the few places where an individual, regardless of their economic background, their race, their religion, their gender identity, sexual orientation, can have access to materials, access computers, access resources, access books. So it is literally a crime when you try to limit what a person has a right to access.
Yeah, I think that also the major issue for me for any books, any list of books that are challenged or that are from the challenge banned from school libraries or public libraries is that someone or a group of people are imposing their values and their opinions onto me or somebody else. And it's not fair, it's not right. It's like saying, well, that my values and my opinions, regardless of whether or not it's different from yours, is wrong. And to be told that is insulting. And also, when parents get involved with book banning or challenging books, it's then saying, oh, so even though my way of parenting is different from yours, you're saying that the way I parent is incorrect. That's again imposing your values, your opinions onto somebody else. And I mean, these parents have every right to pick and choose what their kids can read or not read. That doesn't, though, give them the right to tell other parents that their kids shouldn't be allowed to read something that they don't agree with.
Exactly. And also, as Katie has just mentioned, I also want to make it clear, as a parent or guardian, yes, you do have the right to curate what your child or grandchild or the child that you have in your guardianship reads. However, you do not, as Katie said, have the right to curate what another individual's child can or cannot access. So your rights to sort of limit do not extend to another individual's rights or suppressing that right.
Yep.
And returning to Sarah's work, and I actually forgot to bring the book that I wanted to. So, as I mentioned earlier, the series that we're going to be talking about is A Court of Thorns and Roses. And there are currently 5 books in the series, and one of which is a novella.
So really, there's 4 books.
4 books, one novella. More is on the way, and Katie and I are very excited about that. This is one of my favorite series. And going back to what was mentioned in the article regarding sort of how a work, according to this Virginia law, something is deemed inappropriate is taken as a whole, basically that the sexual aspect of the narrative or certain aspects within the narrative has to be the dominant narrative and has no serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. So if you are familiar with Sarah's series, yes, sex does occur in this series.
Yeah.
Between consenting adults. There are instances of non-consensual sex, but that is within a sort of perspective of critiquing, of basically denouncing said acts. And one thing that I do appreciate about Sarah and these novels is that they do address these issues. Her novels tackle issues of racism, prejudice, sexism, trauma, whether it's sexual or emotional, and the effects of trauma on an individual and how trauma can manifest in different ways.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about any value, that in itself is the value of her works, in addition to her characters being very dynamic. While these characters are not always human, they still are very human.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that she's able to write characters who are flawed, and in reality, human beings are flawed human beings anyway. So I appreciate the fact that she's able to effectively write characters that aren't um, absolutely good, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes sense.
And show their trauma of that they have gained throughout different events in whichever book you're reading. Is crucial to character growth. I think crucial may not be the right word, but it shows she doesn't she doesn't write her characters in keeping with the trauma. She shows them struggle and then overcome those traumas, and she does it in such a way where it's not glorifying any trauma or that the characters experience, but it's a way of empowering her characters, and I really appreciate that.
And I agree completely. And I found a wonderful article. It's titled "Sarah J. Maas Remains the Queen," of Characterization, and it's written by Virginia Beale. And Beale states, "Maas proves that she has done her research and understands emotional responses to trauma. Maas develops characters who have complexity and react realistically to events in their lives, something that many authors cannot accomplish with their own characters. And lastly, her ability to construct compelling characters exceeds that of many modern fantasy authors. Maas's characters are desirable and loved because of both their incomparable skills, which readers envy, and their realistic emotions with which readers understand." And as Katie has said, and I completely agree, and I found another nice article, which is titled "A Sensitive Depiction of Trauma and Healing, a review of Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Silver Flames."
Yeah.
So, A Court of Silver Flames is Maas's latest book in this series, and it centers, for those who aren't familiar with the series, it centers around this character of Nesta.
Who's the older of the Archeron sisters. Freya is the youngest.
She's the youngest, yeah. And it's her story along with another character named Cassian. And it takes place after she has just suffered severe trauma, one, the loss of her father, the primary one, yeah.
War from A Court of Wings and Ruin.
War, and also the loss of bodily autonomy. She is essentially transformed into a fairy against her will. And as you read the book, because I don't really want to spoil anything for those who haven't read it, she goes through this extensive journey. And she is a character that is pretty polarizing. Many in the fandom don't like her. Many do like her. I was one who started off not really liking her character, but as I read this book, I grew to love her and I grew to appreciate her as well.
I mean, for me, it's like, I what I didn't like about her character was that she used anger and meanness. Like, she was a bully. She became a bully in order to keep people at arm's length. And I understand from the trauma that she had experienced that that's the only way she feels that she can protect herself. But at the same time, it's like, all right, enough already. You know, I understand that you have suffered this, but there's a difference between wanting to move above this, and another thing about playing victimizing yourself, kind of a thing. But then as I kept reading, it's like, okay, you find out more about the character. You find out more about that this trauma doesn't just extend to what happened to her within Mist and Fury and Wings and Ruin, but also growing up the way she did. That this is a deep-seated, deep-rooted anger against herself, and it's like, all right, I understand now. I sympathize with you a little more. I'm actually going to have to read the book again because
So that explanation of her character, how you get glimpses into what her childhood was like, who her parents were. You also learn in one of the other books that she's the victim of an attempted sexual assault. So all of these things compound and just forces her to build more and more layers, because there is an element of self-hatred. She does not have any love or any real respect for herself.
Right. I
But
think there's like a line in the book too
yeah.
where she tells Cassian that she felt like she didn't deserve him, so she did everything that she could to keep him at arm's length,
Which is realistic
or
because
to get him to hate her.
yeah, which is realistic because
Yeah.
there are people who have such low self-worth that they believe they are not even worth being loved,
Right.
and they do react in this way.
Right.
But going to the article, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but Beale says Maas exposes Nesta's trauma and the darkness within her, and gives us a 751-page story about pain, guilt, rage, grief, and even vulnerability. Nesta becomes a three-dimensional heroine in her own right. And I absolutely loved seeing her slowly grow and become stronger and learn to live with and embrace her experiences. Maas gracefully and sensitively handles issues of abuse and trauma and shows that it is possible to grow stronger following hardship. And I think this is also why many people love her work.
Yeah, well, it's why I love her work. I mean, I
Exactly.
have to get over my own thoughts about Nesta as a character, because it's just my own hang up which is why I want to read the book again. But with other authors who I have read in the past who write about trauma, it's like you see the trauma, you see what they went through, you see how they're suffering, and then a few chapters later they're over it, and it's like not a non-realistic approach to dealing with what they had initially gone through. And it's like, oh no, it never happened, I'm all better, kind of a thing. So I really vastly appreciate how much work Maas did with showing, like I said, growth. Like the 751 pages are essentially of Nesta evolving as a character, working through the trauma she experienced or the emotional hang-ups that she has, and spoiler, being able to love herself most importantly, but get over whatever jealousy she ever had with Faerie, and then being able to open herself enough to actually fall in love and truly love Cassian as he loves her. So and it's like it is a big, I love happy endings.
Yes.
So to have her the ability to have a happy ending at the end of the story is really very it's a healing that has come to completion.
Definitely. And if we want to return back to the book that's the actual subject of the suit in the Virginia court, A Court of Mist and Fury, so that is the second book in the series, and there will be spoilers, so if you haven't finished, if you're not familiar, we just want to let you know because it's a great book and we don't want to ruin it. So if you haven't yet read it, stop and then come back to us once you've had.
Yes.
So in the book, the central character is a woman named Faerie. And in the previous novel, she is someone who has gone through a tremendous amount of trauma. She is essentially tortured, brutalized, and then murdered by the villain of the story.
We should say that this isn't like in the beginning or the middle of the novel. It's at the end.
Yeah. And she is brought back, but in the second novel, what you learn is that she is still dealing with the trauma of the previous month's experience. So she has vivid nightmares which cause her to vomit. She is losing weight.
Yep. So she's essentially suffering from post-traumatic stress.
Exactly. And the sort of, I don't want to call him an anti-hero, maybe he is, but the other central character of the story is Rhysand. Sorry, that was a truck. Who is the Lord of the Night Court, and in the previous novel, he makes this bargain with Faerie, basically saying, is it a week out of every?
It's a week. It's 1 week out of every month, where she'll leave the Spring Court and go to the Night Court.
So So essentially, Rhysand calls in the bargain. He happens to do it on the day of Faerie's wedding, because what you learn is that she's really not too thrilled about marriage.
Not
And
marriage in general, just
Yeah.
marrying Tamlin,
Yeah.
who's a real. Ooh, I don't like him. I don't like him.
he's also another polarizing character within the fandom.
Yeah.
So he takes her back to the Night Court, and essentially the story is the two of them, through flirtation, through like banter, they both help one another heal. So the actual sex, or because one of the issues is that the sex is very gratuitous and it's very explicit. The explicit part, yes, there is no doubt the sex is explicit. However, YA, there are books within YA that one would consider maybe clean romances, very G to use that rating. Then there are books that are slightly more PG, which have maybe more kissing, slightly more description, maybe a fade to black love scene. And then there are books which the sex is slightly more descriptive, or other behaviors and actions of teens, which is also a reflection of the experiences of some teens.
I think the issue is that the book itself is reflecting reality that a lot of people don't want teens to be exposed to, when it's a little silly, because it's everyday life. It's just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's not going to stop happening in social norms
Yeah.
anyway.
And going back to the
Yes, Joe?
Sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to chime in with a question to stir
Sure.
the discussion. Why is it you think that books are more often targeted for like depicting sex or whatever, when like like compared to like TV shows or movies that are still aimed at teenagers and often like you still depict it?
That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe because it's easier. It's easier to challenge a book and make a whole big fuss about a book than it is to challenge, I think, like a movie or a TV show.
Yeah.
Because I feel like with a movie or a TV show, you have more of like the studio backing. You have more
It has more to do with how it's accessed, I guess.
Right.
Whereas with books, you could maybe get a local library to cave to Pressure, or a school district to cave, but you're not going to get, say, HBO.
Right.
I think it
Right.
also, going back to access, it kind of reminds me of, if you think about the classic film A Streetcar Named Desire, it was originally a play. Mm-hmm. Now, when the film came out, it already had Hollywood censors going crazy. Mm-hmm. But they had to cut out a lot. The play, I think, was maybe a bit more descriptive in certain regards. Like, I read the play. It wasn't like overly gratuitous, but you could see where when they went from play, which was a more limited audience, versus films, which had more mass consumption, they had to alter a lot. So going back to Joe's question, I think that's what it is as well. Books, in terms of a medium, are more readily accessible, thankfully, because of libraries in particular, but also they can be found in bookstores. You can listen to audiobooks, you can read them in ebook fashion, versus a film may have a more limited audience. You even think about, because I've spoken about Korean dramas before, though Korean dramas, there are variations. There are some that are more conservative, others that are sort of pushing the boundaries of what is acceptable. I'm thinking of this one drama where the first episode was banned because it was deemed too sexually explicit.
In Korea?
Yes.
Interesting.
When I watched Korean dramas, I was like, oh, okay, so you're not really going to depict sex. You never really saw kissing, although that is changing. Then I watched a movie and I got traumatized. I'm like, oh my God, people have sex. People do more than hold hands in Korea. So I think that's what it is too. It's the audience who can easily access these. With films, although, and even shows, there are plenty that have been challenged. Like, I know Netflix's show, series Cuties, by this French director, had many people up in arms because they saw it as pedophilia, as glorifying the sexual exploitation of minors.
Which is funny because that happens in reality. You look at beauty pageants all the time, and it's the things that parents allow their young children to do because it's a beauty pageant.
Exactly.
It's a double standard that really irks me.
And I think also, because I remember when I was in one of my English classes, our teacher said, because if you watch European cinema or European shows, another thing that will shock you is that they're not prudish when it comes to nudity
No.
or sex.
No.
With our country, we seem to tolerate violence more so than we tolerate any kind of sexual activity in any of our media. Like, I remember, speaking from my own experience, I was in, because my family's originally from Sicily. So I was looking at a magazine, and in our magazines, even when they're talking about breast issues, the breasts are like, there was like a fog covering it. And I remember opening the magazine, and I saw everything. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my God, you don't censor breasts over here?
Yeah.
And my aunt was like, we're not hypocrites. So
Yeah, well, you see, I mean, I think that also stems from how this country was initially founded, and was initially founded under Puritan religious standards. And they have a very strict outlook on sex and sexuality, and it's permeated from colonial era all the way down to our modern social and cultural way of thinking.
Yeah.
Not everybody, but a good portion of the population.
Yeah, and then returning back to the book, in terms of like, and I'm trying to return back to the lawsuit, which states where a book can qualify under this
Right.
law if it's deemed to have no value if the sexual content is the focal point of the book. And if you are familiar with this book, that is
It's
not
not.
the case.
No.
So Faerie and Rhysand, the eventual couple of this series, or one of the couples, do not, well, that's wrong, but they don't actually have actual intercourse. They do some other things, but they don't have actual intercourse until chapter 54 of the novel. And that's after they've had a serious like discussion, or Rhysand sort of discusses an incident that occurred in the previous novel, his shame for what he had to do, and Faerie is the one who initiates and says, I accept this bond, I accept you. Then they have sex.
Right. It's an
yeah.
adult look. It's a mature depiction. I was going to say adult, but it's a mature depiction of two people consenting to have sex, and it's how interactions between men and women should be. I mean, not to say that unconsensual sex happens all the time.
Yeah.
But it's after a serious discussion between the two. It's, I don't know how to describe it. I had it good in my head, and now it's just not.
It's a really beautiful moment, because at this point, at the point in that story, Faerie has just learned something very major, that she is Rhysand's mate. Rhysand, of course, has known for a very long time, but as you learn about his character, he is someone who also suffers from some, I don't know if self-hate, but he does not believe that he is worthy of love either. So because he believes that Faerie may not acknowledge the bond, and at this point, Faerie up until this point has been with another man, he's not even sure where she stands with regards to whether or not she wants to continue that relationship. So he decides that it's best that she not know. She finds out, and rightfully so, calls him out on his deception, and she leaves him for like a few weeks. She goes off someplace because she says, I need to be alone. Eventually, he finds where she is. He waits for her to say, yes, you can come in. And he basically says, will you allow me to tell my story, and will you allow me to say why I did what I did? And Faerie says, yes, I'll cook, you talk, and then I will let you know what I have decided.
Yeah, I think also too during that time where she's in the cabin in the woods within the night court, she also comes to the realization that she had told him that she would never run away from him, and within within learning that she was his mate after he was wounded during a battle that's not prevalent to this, but after finding out and not, essentially she says she didn't trust him enough to tell her the truth about it. She ran away from him, and she felt, and so she felt also that she was at fault as well for not hearing him beforehand. So she felt like she also like broke a promise that she had made to him. So that, and then within that span, he has flown to the cabin because he has wings, because he's an Illyrian.
Yes.
He's amazing. And she lets him comes into the cabin after he asks her, and then they start talking, and she makes him food. And it's tradition within the Fae of this world that if a female gives food to a male that they are mated, she is accepting the bond.
Exactly. So at this point, Rhysand has been someone who has been in love with Faerie for a very long time, because what you learn is that even before she became Fae, he was having dreams of her. He was having these glimpses into her life. So he is someone that has held a torch for Faerie long before she ever knew he existed. And he explains this story, and what you learn is that, which you also learn in the first book, that he is a victim of sexual assault. For 50 years, he was raped by this woman who essentially not only used him for his body, but used him to perform other duties for her, which he found distasteful. But considering that he was robbed of all power, he tried to do the best that he could within a very terrible situation. And he has watched other people being abused. So he is someone with a lot of trauma as well. It doesn't excuse his behavior, but you also learn that he is a victim as well. And he explains this to Faerie, and afterwards Faerie hands him the soup, and she says that she loves him, that she is still broken, but she still has trauma, but she is learning to heal.
Yeah, broken isn't the right word.
Yeah,
she is still she is still suffering from the trauma that she experienced, but slowly I think she says in the book her heart has been broken, but slowly with his help she has been able to mend her heart, and she's essentially saying that she gives that heart to him.
Exactly. And of course, like any couple, they consummate their love.
Yeah.
That's one of the favorite chapters of a lot of people in the fandom, but they consummate.
And it's the one scene in the rest of the book
Exactly.
that gets descriptive about their lovemaking.
Which honestly, and for those who haven't yet read Silver Flames, get ready, because Sarah took smut to a whole new level in that book, like I was. But so
in A Court in Silver Flame, you have to also understand that people deal with trauma in different ways.
Exactly.
So she is showing how Nesta deals with a very traumatic experience with, I think, mostly with the loss of her father.
Yes.
And then the experiences of war against Hybern, who's the big baddie in the originals series. And it just shows that, and a lot of people deal with trauma in that way that it's depicted. Again, I think what people have an issue with is that the books, although fantasy in genre, reflect a lot of reality in real life, and I think that's what people have an issue with, and I really don't think people need to have an issue with that.
Yeah, and if we return to like why this book is being included in the suit, like after they consummate the relationship, they return to their family, and the rest of the book is them trying to figure out because war is imminent, who their allies are, and how they are going to overcome. So the rest of the book is not like every single page is just Faerie and Rhysand engaging in all these sexual acts while the world falls apart around them. That is not the case.
No.
So to include it in this suit is kind of interesting because the book is not about these two characters engaging in all these sexual acts. The book is more than that. And even the book Silver Flames, which maybe one day we'll talk about, the sex in the book, once you learn about Nesta's character, is also her means of coping. It's not always a healthy means,
Right.
which is addressed in the book. But a
Right.
lot of victims of trauma, they may react in engaging in very reckless behaviors. So that is addressed and that is acknowledged and it's not praised.
No, it's not glorified at all.
But even while in that book, there definitely are more explicit situations. In that book, we put in our adult section because we felt it was appropriate to keep it there.
Yeah.
But it still is read by people that may not identify as an adult. When I was younger, I read a lot of books that may not have been appropriate for my age. But what I will say, so in our library, we have a service, two services, one for adults, one for teens, Teen Mystery Book Bag. And what I did was I tried to take into consideration what themes or subject matter a particular teen may not wish to read. So we give teens the power to say, I don't want to read anything with violence or sexual content. And we do our best to find books that meet those standards. A teen is aware enough to determine what they can deal with and cannot deal with.
Yes.
So, and for many teens, another book that I think is recently being challenged is called Monday Is Not Here, and it's by Tiffany Jackson. And I read that story. It's very heartbreaking, and it's about a teen whose best friend goes missing and is later found that she was murdered. And Tiffany Jackson wrote this story because she wanted to acknowledge missing African American girls who go missing and are often not necessarily acknowledged by media, or their cases don't receive as much attention. Right. So that was the intent.
Yeah, that's true.
Behind this book. But what people took issue to, and as far as I recall, the book is not that graphic, but they took issue to the fact that it discusses a teen whose friend has been murdered, which for many teens, that could very much be like, yes, I've known someone who was murdered.
Especially probably, I don't want to generalize or anything, but a teen who's probably grown up in the inner city probably knows somebody who knows somebody where that's been the case. Again, I don't want to generalize at all, but that, it's real life. It's reality for a large portion of people who live in this country. And to deny that, I think, does a disservice to teens who want to read something about that.
And I think also, as the author of the one article that I read, for many people who have read Sarah's books, they can probably see an element of a character within themselves, but there are a lot of characters in her novels. They mostly tend to be female, but there are, of course, some men in her novels that have gone through sexual trauma. But for many of the characters, especially, and it makes sense, during times of war, there are atrocities that are committed against those who fight and those who are civilians. And Maas is able to capture that because war affects everyone. In fact, there's a very great line where one of the wives of one of the High Lords tells another High Lord, because this is after he's told her that as a wife, she's just there to sit there. She's not there to give an opinion. And she says, if war comes, we will be bleeding right along with you.
Yeah.
It's not going to not touch us.
Yeah.
And throughout the story, you meet people who, because of the wars, because of violence, have experienced trauma.
I think there's a really great scene
Yeah.
in the novella A Court of Frost and Starlight, where Faerie and her sister Elaine go to a weaver's shop, and she sees like the tapestry of the stars
Oh, yeah.
and the black background, and the weaver essentially explains that she had lost her husband in the war, and none of the people of the night court were conscripted. He had volunteered. And when he died, she had such a void in her heart that she created void within her tapestry. And it was a way of her to heal from the loss of her husband. And it's such a beautiful scene. It's such a well-written scene. I'm like getting emotional just from talking about it. I got emotional reading it. It's
And once again, the way characters even respond to other characters who are experiencing trauma is also very realistic.
yes.
If we do discuss Silver Flames, even the way people respond to Nesta is also based on their preconceived notions. If you look at Rhysand, he has no love for Nesta at first. He believes her very selfish. He hasn't yet forgiven her for what she did to Faerie. So every action of hers is hyper critiqued by him, but he is called out on it. It's not like he's allowed to make those judgments and not receive a reaction.
Right.
And he later admits, you're right, I should not have said that, like, I'm wrong. So, like I said, her characters are complex. Her characters are multi-layered, and her worlds are
flawed.
fantastic. They are flawed. They're not perfect, which is a
No.
reflection of reality.
Right.
No one is perfect.
No.
You will make decisions that you may regret later, and that's okay, as you know, as long as you acknowledge it and then move forward. So I definitely don't feel that A Court of Mist and Fury would fit the standard according to the law that's being used to put it in, like, this obscenity law. I don't believe that is the case with the book.
I don't agree with that
Yeah.
at all. Clearly to me it's a group of people, or this politician and his lawyer, they haven't read the book. They don't know anything about the book, so they're putting it in this lawsuit for one scene that's not even in the beginning. It's towards the end of the story. So it's I don't want to call it ridiculous, but it's
Well, and also the fact that they want to even extend it where a bookseller cannot even sell the book.
yeah.
So you're sort of going above and beyond in that you not only want to restrict it in public schools, you want to restrict it in
To
bookstores.
the general public.
Exactly. And
I mean, I'm an adult. I love this book series.
Yeah.
And for you to say that now not even adults can read it, well, then that's extending. That's extending your reach into what I can or cannot read.
And most bookstores, as you told me before, like her series, with the exception of Throne of Glass, which is another fantastic series, the ACOTAR series, and her she has another adult series which has also been on some challenge lists as well. Though that is clearly marketed towards adults, are in the adult section.
Yeah, they're both in the adult fantasy section. They're nowhere.
But then again, you know, like how many of our viewers or listeners at an age when it would not have been quote unquote appropriate wandered into the adult section and picked up an adult book? I did it. My younger sister did. Like, she was reading Anne Rice before it would have been considered appropriate for her to read an Anne Rice book. But we all know our limits.
Yeah.
We all know what we can tolerate and not tolerate within our books. And I think and like I said, going back to even the discussion of the book by That Monday's Not Here, and even the book The Hate You Give, which I read. One of the reasons why that is being challenged is because of its depiction of violence, racism, which is the whole point of the book. And also, supposedly, it promotes a disrespect towards police authority. I think was one of the reasons why it's being challenged.
It said that it was anti-police rhetoric.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at some of the reasons why books have been banned, like one of the reasons that made me read The Giving Tree was that it has been banned, it has been challenged for years. And I was like, why is this easy book for children being challenged? So I read it, I was like, I don't get it. And then I read, one of the reasons is promoting abuse of mothers, basically the idea that mothers are just these people that give and give and give and give, and children can take and take and take and take, and they receive no reward.
Which is not the point of the book.
Which is not the point of the book.
The point of the book is to, you have a selfish character, but then by the end of it, he learns that if he wasn't so selfish, he would have appreciated what the tree was to him.
Is that what he learned? Because I kind of
up.
thought...
He, as an old man, he essentially apologizes.
It does? I thought he just sits on the stump.
I
forgot.
He apologizes to the tree, which is now a stump, for being selfish and that he's tired and that he's sorry, and because he's an old man, and the tree says, well, I have nothing left to give, but you may sit on me and rest. And that's what he does. And the appreciation for the tree shows a little more at the end, towards the end of the book. And it's a book about appreciating for what you have.
Exactly.
On that note, I just want to come in with the funniest book banning I saw when I was going through the ALA list.
Yeah.
It was one of the Shelf Silverstein books. I forget which one. I think it was Where the Sidewalk Ends.
It's either Where the Sidewalk Ends or A Light in the Attic.
It was promoting children breaking dishes to get out of cleaning them, which I it's just the most hyper-specific point.
Yeah. I mean, both of his books, A Light in the Attic and Where the Sidewalk Ends, were being challenged because the group or the parents believed that the poems that are in both books, that make up both books, were promoting bad behavior towards parental authority.
Because that never happens.
Right.
Even, like, honestly, I think sometimes I kind of equate people who use that as an excuse are the same people that during the satanic scares were blaming rock bands, blaming Dungeons and Dragons games. It's like, human nature is human nature. Some people need no excuse to behave as they do. Children, to varying degrees, will act out, will misbehave. They don't need a book to teach them to do that. That is part of growing up, where you challenge and you push your boundaries.
Right.
So they don't need a book to help them do that.
No.
And I think with some of these challenges, it's something that offends your sensibilities, so you want to restrict it because it offends you.
Right.
Which, going back to my point before, you have the right to do that for yourself, but you do not have the right to restrict access to others. So I don't know if you have anything else that you want to...
I don't have really anything else. I think I just want to say that challenging a book where you're restricting the reading of it to other people is such a double standard in our society that I get a real physical reaction to it. It makes me so angry, and that I can't stand it. I just can't. And it's something in our society where yes, it is allowed. You are allowed as a parent or a guardian to restrict what your child can and cannot read, but that doesn't give you the right to do that to other parents who may not see an issue, who may not have an issue with whatever the child is reading. That's all I'm going to say on that topic.
And agree 100% with Katie. And I will end by promoting some of our services. So in addition to physical books, which we have the entire series, we also have some of these books on Hoopla. Hoopla also offers the graphic audio versions, which are fantastic.
They are fantastic.
Because they have music, they have sound effects. It is a full cast. Terrific.
It's great.
And they're also offered on Libby. So if you have any questions about any of these services, please come and see us or talk to us over the phone, and we'll more than gladly explain it. And as always, keep on reading, keep on challenging Banned Book Week, because no one has the right to ban any book. Come to your library, support
Support your library.
because it's very important. It makes us know that we have the support of our community.
Yeah.
And enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope that you enjoyed this episode.
And enjoy reading. And
Yes.
read banned books.
Read banned books.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.